Stop! Stop now and come near. Hear the tale of Alaman Mankiller and the Sword of Dragons. But, if you are faint of heart, move on. For our tale is one of grand adventure. Love, war, betrayal, and vengeance shall spill out now upon these poor boards. And I warn you, not all that are good and well, not all that are evil are punished. Come close, my friends, and know that in our tale, as in the world, anything may happen. I couldn't think of a better quote to start the review with. Those aren't the first words, they're not even in the prologue, but they are, in my mind, an introduction to the story, an enticement, calling you to hear the tale of daggers and coins. This is a review of The Dagger and Coin, a 5-book series written by Daniel Abraham. After refreshing and re-immersing you in the world, I'll discuss the story and its themes, contributing to the conversation it begins. Fair warning, this is a spoiler review. If you have not read the book series, I would encourage you to do so, especially if you enjoy reading thoughtful, well-crafted stories with deep themes. The basic setting is a version of medieval Europe. Most of the main characters live in this world with no magic and little experience with magic. Nothing out of the ordinary. Though it should be mentioned, they are like atheists with the option to be polytheist, which is totally not what Europe was like at all in medieval times. But for the most part, economically and magically, I guess, it's pretty much Europe. They would have the Mediterranean. Not by that name, of course, but there's are some pretty significant differences though, if you're thinking about them. So there's 13 versions of humanity, like 13 races. There's like water ones. There's like ones up who live in the cold and they have like they're like fat, I guess, so they insulated. There's all sorts of ones. But while reading, the particular version of human didn't really seem to matter that much. Depending on the character, sometimes it did, but usually it didn't really. Sometimes I would just be like suddenly reminded of it, especially at the beginning, and be like, oh, I forgot that was a thing, because it just doesn't come up that much, other than like at the beginning when he's explaining that there's different races, and there's sometimes where it's pretty relevant. There's, especially in like social situations, there's at one point the genocide of one of them, which was, that meant that every character who was a roach, I forget what their actual name was, but they called them roaches. That meant it was pretty important detail that you should know. One, I guess, interesting thing about that is Yardam. For some reason, I always knew he was whatever the dog version was or whatever. I think it just fit with his personality so well. I couldn't not think of him that way. And it's kind of like Chewbacca in a lot of senses, so it was just an easy way to think about that. But there's another big element, kind of like an elephant in the corner throughout the whole book series, is dragons. The dragons in the story they have the most advanced civilization ever. They're responsible for making the races of humanity, so that's pretty important. But long before the time of the story, their empire fell and they all went extinct. Not really, but pretty much. You've read the story, you know all about this. They left behind a massive history, an extensive network of unbreakable roads and ruins of giant cities. So yeah, just huge impact on the story, but not actually present in it, except for, you read the book at the very end. Another element of fantasy, this is probably the most significant, at least in my mind, is the spiders, or the spider priests, I guess. Spider priests. So I'll remind you real quick in case you forget. They can detect lies and convince people of the truth. Convince people of the truth, like, I guess they're just extra persuasive no matter what they say. Like, they don't pick good words. Their words just have more weight. But one thing about detecting lies is they don't actually detect falsehoods, though they believe they do. They detect certainty, and hence the main theme of the book, and hence, that's just their excursions into the West from their home in the East, their faraway, isolated home, is kind of what sets the story in motion. So, I really liked this story. I thought it was a really well-crafted story. The world really feels real to me. It feels lived in, and it feels vast. The characters, even the side characters, are super consistent. There's perhaps not enough character development throughout the story, but on the other hand, there's also just not enough praise they can give the series in such a short video. It was super well done, super tight. But more than the world building and the character exploration, what I truly admired about the series was the pacing. Political intrigue like Dawson, Clara, and Getter's plotlines can get very confusing with too many names and loyalties to properly keep track of. But Abraham kept this in check. There were really only three main factions within the court and less than 10 key players over 600,000 words. Maybe there's more, but those are the ones that just stuck out to me when I was just thinking about it. Um, this is just one example of how tight of a rein Daniel keeps on his plot, though. I should also mention the sense he made of Setherin's banking, because that can obviously get pretty complicated if you're not super precise with your pacing and world building. But yeah, the foreshadowing was great in the series. There were interconnections between plot lines. Characters that are introduced to one character often show up later with another character, which keeps the cast of characters small and allows me, the reader, and you, the reader, to get to know even the side characters well. Um, the clear and well-crafted plot lines of the book allowed for just brilliant twists and turns in the story. So, like in the beginning of the second book, after Cytherin is relegated to no more than a figurehead for her bank, there's this masterful scene just building up her meeting, not scene, scenes, building up to her meeting with her overseer. Just this is like paragraph after paragraph of not much more than complaining about her boss. Yet somehow I was just engaged the whole time. Somehow I was pulled along, and then the confrontation goes down. Everything Cytherin had said up to that point and thought in the preceding scenes had been slanted like against her overseer. Like the overseer she despised so much was not really the vile person her thoughts portrayed. I didn't expect this going into the scene, but I should have. Like many of Abraham's twists, it's more than plausible, which is I like that phrase for a lot of his twists. It kept coming back to me as I was listening to the stories. That's just more than plausible. It's not just it makes sense. Like that was good. It's satisfying and it's good. Another example. Well, actually, this is a negative example. When Kit arrived in Kamnapol for the first time and saw the banner of the Spider Goddess, and he leaves. I didn't want him to leave his troop, but I was also excited to see where he would go, with after they aren't like I guess slowing him down because I mean he has magic and they don't, so they're gonna slow him down. But after he goes on all his adventures with Marcus, and he gets the sword and they go back and they're back in Kamnapol and then just out of nowhere, just boom, there's the troop and it's like okay, I guess they're back now. That one I didn't like as much. But there's plenty I did like. For example, the discovery of Innis the dragon. That was I guess it wasn't really a shocking twist. The cave, the dragon in the cave was foreshadowed at the beginning of the book, so I knew it was coming, or at least guessed it was coming. But the process of seeing those events unfold and just Marcus's awe upon seeing the dragon in the brief, confusing time, seeing through the dragon's eyes, it was all delightful. Then there's the execution of Dawson. Again, not really. The execution itself wasn't a surprise, but the events leading up to it were just fraught with tension, and I didn't know which way it was gonna go. You have two main characters, Dawson and Getter, and they're pitted against each other, and one of the two have to give. And I didn't know how like both characters would survive, and neither of them did. Dawson died. Not neither of them. One of them didn't. Dawson died. So that was, I guess, a plot twist that it's not really like a twist that comes out of nowhere, which is I think why I like it. But it's like it retroactively makes sense. So another thing with that is Clara then took his point of view. Bold move, something I enjoyed immensely. Though she didn't accomplish as much as the other character did, I just really liked her as a character. She was interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I just enjoyed her personality. Was glad to see her children safe at the end of the book. I guess I just think she's a good person or something. I don't know. Yeah. She's the kind of character that I feel like I could just like have a really good friendship with. As opposed to someone like Getter, who I also like, but for like the opposite reasons. Though I'm sure, yeah, never mind. Yeah, another one of these is probably one of the first big surprises, and maybe even the most shocking, was the burning of Vinai. As an action, just bold and terrible. The last thing I expected from an anxious man like Getter Poliago. Yet upon reflection, the action was more than plausible. Again, I like that phrase. Getter's anxiety makes him slow to act, but when he reacts, when he feels backed into a corner, he strikes with no restraint. He fights as though it's his last fight, sacrificing everything to hurt his enemies. So that the scene of him burning Vinai, it's like, wow, that's shocking, but it also makes a lot of sense as to why that would happen, and it highlights parts of his characters that are just so interesting, and they fit so well with the themes of the book too. I guess fit well slash shape the themes of the book. But yeah, the next twist I want to highlight is Getter's ascension to regency. So after scandals, incidents, conspiring to give him popularity, he has the popularity of the court. All it takes is one last piece of his fortune to put him above the entire empire of Antea. The twist is perhaps a little contrived, the death of the king happening right at that moment, but it's the perfect example of the kind of person Getter is, and it allows him to speak the themes of the tale told. Getter is a man whose ambition outpaces his competence and whose fortune surpasses both. Power is seemingly thrown upon him, and he eagerly takes it, only to be crushed by it, taking the world down with him. The last twist pertaining to Getter was his death. Getter was put in the perfect situation, a choice between risking failure or embracing death. And Getter chooses death. This was a twist as bold as any other, and it is the perfect launch into discussing the themes of the book. So Getter Paliaga's story is a tragedy. It's a warning against tyranny, blind loyalty, and I believe it's a warning against fear. One of my favorite parts of the tale was when the high priest left to deal with a faction of priests who he considered heretical. This left Getter all alone in Camdenpole. Getter slowly spiraled into hopelessness and doubt as he looked out and saw that reality was falling short of the utopian promises of the spider goddess. It's a slow descent, and I didn't even notice it until the high priest returned, and suddenly Getter's like, "Oh yeah, I'm happy to be regent again, and everything's great." But yeah, I didn't even notice it until then. It was super slow and I guess well paced. I guess I don't know. Maybe you would want to know it, or maybe you did notice it. But that's how I read that, and I was really satisfied with that. But as Getter was sinking into despair, his mindset, and this is like retroactively just thinking about it, like it was so brilliantly done. His mindset is contrasted by the other characters. Each of them are confronting danger and hardship. Clara risking her life, her family by bringing them into rebellion. Marcus returned to the place he was most known for, where he killed the king. So that's risky. Cithrin was venturing into the unknown of a finance system based on like nothing rather than a system based on gold, which, we in the 21st century know that works pretty well, but for her, that's pretty risky. She even went behind the back of the other bankers to do it. And all this ambition, all this courage is fueled by hope. It's fueled by a belief that fighting for a better future is worth the cost. And I guess this hope, it comes from courage. Whereas Getter is ambitious. Like he has big dreams, but his ambition isn't fueled by hope. It's fueled by fear. With his priest with him, he has this illusion of hope and the illusion of ambition, but really it's nothing more than like false confidence or zeal. If he actually believed seeking his utopia would risk his life or his reputation, probably more so his reputation, I think, especially considering his martyrdom. But yeah, if he believed seeking this utopia would risk his reputation, he probably wouldn't have done anything. He probably wouldn't act. His confidence isn't really courage; it's actually naivety, which is a pretty big difference. Throughout the story, Getter is guided by fear. Most importantly, his fear of betrayal. He's constantly questioning those around him, hoping they would tell him what he wants to hear, and fearing that their encouragement was not a lie. The one person he couldn't doubt was the high priest, which, is in a large part due to the supernatural powers. But in addition to that, Getter believed the priest because the priest told him things he wanted to hear. And at first, the priest backed it up in... At first, the priest backed it up. In a short time, Getter had expanded the empire of Antea greatly, planting a temple in every conquered city. The priests told him that he had the power to rule. They told him that all things needed to be taken and ruled by a great man. In the end, however, the priests were defeated not by power or intellect, but by the very weapon they split Antea with, the fear of Getter Paliago, wielded this time by Cithrin. Getter he's always controlled by his fear. In the beginning, he's controlled by his fear in the burning of an eye. He's controlled by his fear as he's manipulated by I forgot blanking on his name for a second. um, by Dawson to save the king, and then he's manipulated by fear by the priests all throughout, as they're like this is the way to go. You have to do this. And then he's even manipulated by fear when Sithrin comes back and is like, "Hey, I'll like you, but only if you do things for me," which that's a whole bunch of moral dilemmas that I don't have time to get into. But yeah, so like the entire time he's manipulated by fear, and it actually allows for one of the most tragic aspects of Getter's fall, which is his motives. He has good motives. He wanted safety for his people. He wanted freedom for his nation, free from corruption. Perhaps the most noble, or at least the most pure, of his desires was his desire to see Prince Aster become a great king and live a good life. It's like he wants to be, I guess, a good father or father figure. Yet each of these virtues was twisted by the priests themselves, twisted by their own nature. All of the suffering inflicted on Antea, on the world by Antea, could have been stopped by Getter just choosing the courageous path, or by the priest choosing to cultivate the word, probably. Which is, yeah, you get it. It's something Kit said. But anyways, all this is a great segue into one of the themes of the book that impacted me the most, which is that this book challenges like tightly held beliefs, all of them. Not most obviously religious beliefs, but every belief, political beliefs, social beliefs, like what color of your shirt you should wear. I don't know. Every belief, like it says, question it because it can lead to bad things. The Spider Priests believed that they were doing what was right. If their religious convictions were true, every action they made would, it would be moral. But they, despite their good intentions, their unquestioning loyalty to something that was just wrong led them astray. So the question is, well, the obvious question is make sure you're right, but that's a pretty hard question to put into practice. So I think the questions this book asks me more are, how do you know your beliefs aren't leading you astray? And what if the actions you take to the things you aspire are actually evil? And if your faith turns out to be wrong, how can you mitigate the harm of your ideals? So I guess it's like, how do you act in such a way that, like, whatever you believe, you're not harming other people? Which is tough because, yeah, you know why it's tough. You can think about that. Like, you have conflicting beliefs. Maybe you believe that it's best for people to own a dog because you really like owning a dog. And then so you become a dog breeder and a mad scientist and you breed way too many dogs, and then now everyone, like, now you have to feed these dogs or watch them die, and no one wants that situation. That's a tough situation. So now your belief that a dog is a good thing led you astray. And obviously that's a pretty silly example, but you can probably think of examples in your own life of things you believe that everyone should have, that if you're wrong could lead you astray. So Getter's not the only one. Dawson, he's not religious, so he's not like the Spider Priests in that sense, where they're strict on the religious ideals, but Dawson does have very strong beliefs about morality and social structure. They're like his political beliefs. And these beliefs, I think, are what make him such a great character. You've got like his devotion to his family, which makes him super admirable, but at the same time, you have the value system that gives rise to this devotion to family. Leads him to some pretty questionable places. He's just like super conservative, which, if you're conservative, I've leaned conservative, isn't like, it's not bad to do that, but he's conservative for his time, which is a time way before now. So he's got some pretty what would be considered very extreme beliefs and even harmful beliefs. For example, he rejects like the Farmers' Council. He doesn't even want the commoners to have any say in government. That's pretty extreme. He absolutely despises Jory's wife for her promiscuity, and like doesn't even want Jory to be able to marry her. Which, that's not quite as extreme, I guess. But I think the extreme to which he despises her is extreme. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. But yeah, Dawson just holds a lot of assumptions very tightly, like the priests do. And I think ultimately his devotion to his family makes him a noble character, but his devotion to the his devotion to the traditional values of his nation, it's ultimately his undoing. He tries to assassinate Getter and he dies because of it. This is a brief side note, Dawson's themes, but I wanted to touch on it before talking about Clara. So Clara has strong beliefs as well. Um, you know, I guess gender roles. She allows Dawson to lead the house, though it should be said she did stand up to him at times, fighting for peace in her own way. She also had an intense oncom. She had like a lot of loyalty to her family. Not really willing, or she's willing to risk her life to bring down Getter as well, which, risking your life, that's got to be a strong ideal. Um, Her beliefs aren't really as extreme as Dawson's, but they're not really that far off. There are some key differences, though, that I think make her very different from Dawson and also different from the priests. So, number one is Clara is capable of forgiveness, something which I don't think Dawson or the priests, I mean, maybe to some extent, but not to the level of most people. They're very unforgiving. So, for example, Jory introduces Sabia, intending to marry her, and Dawson's just like, he's not having it. So if not for like Sabia, Dawson wouldn't have allowed Sabia to marry Jory, which is pretty extreme. Not extreme. That's not the word I use. Pretty unforgiving. Sabia makes what he considers a mistake, and now he's like forever cursing her with it. Meanwhile, Clara is treating her with respect, and there's numerous other examples of Clara treating people with respect, and even more of Dawson and the priest as well, just like being completely unforgiving. For example, the high priest of the spider goddess, there's like what do you call it, the blanking words. You have the priests who were like coming up with their own ideas, and he's like, well, we have to end this, we have to go kill them, we have to go get rid of them. They take the swords that they have just for that purpose, just for killing heretical people who, just disagree with you, and it's like, no forgiveness. I guess he did try and get them to recant, so maybe he's a little bit more forgiving than Dawson, but something tells me he didn't ask them to recant out of forgiveness. But then there's another thing that separates Clara from the others, and that's her willingness to change. She holds her beliefs. She does hold beliefs, but she holds them loosely. So Dawson only had one major change of plans, which is supporting Getter and then later fighting Getter, trying to assassinate him. Meanwhile, Clara has like numerous changes of allegiances, often subtle changes. She changes her plans all the time, inviting people into her family, rejecting people from her family, all that sort of stuff. Furthermore, she's just far slower to lay a plan in general, waiting for the right opportunity, slowly building allies as she waits. This is how she outmaneuvered Felden Moss at the end of the first book, just slowly working on Felia Moss until Getter and his priest could just break her loyalty with their powers, I guess. But ultimately, I think this loose hold on her beliefs is what allows her to forgive. If you're willing to change, it implies you're willing to admit that you're occasionally wrong. And if you're willing to do that, if you're willing to say, I'm occasionally wrong, how can you deny others a second chance after their mistakes? I think this is one of the main lessons of the series is hold your convictions, stand by your values, but don't hold them too tightly. Cithrin, and so I'm going to try Cithrin's themes into this as well. Cithrin was a banker. Her work was reallocation of resources. But to the untrained eye, to my eye, it often seems like an illusion, just like you're creating profit out of nothing. Like you didn't produce anything, you just moved some money around, and now you have more money. How does that work? Which I get the basics, but it's pretty incredible. Incredible is like not credible or uncredible, not really, but incredible has that amount of Anyways, her final gambit, her scheme to replace the gold standard and just get infinite money, that's like pure simple manipulation of like truth, trust, reality, all that stuff, and not in like a bad way, not like for a bad purpose, though I guess in a few years when the banks realize inflation exists, that's a pretty bad thing, I guess. But the goal of her getting all that imaginary money isn't like a terrible thing. She uses it for good, and but it's still just made up. So I think Cithrin's plot, and not so much the plot, but just her character and setting in general, it demonstrates that like collectively believing in something that's not true, it can not only be beneficial, but sometimes believing in a falsehood can make that falsehood true. Language, for example, not really relevant unless you have someone to share that language with. So useful versus truth, but that's a matter of distinction, I think. Traffic signs are useless without society to agree on their meaning. There are countless other examples of just things we rely on every day that only work because we agree that they work. Like if driving on the right side of the road, it only works because we agree that it works. I tried to tie Marcus's themes into this theme of beliefs and truth and all that as well, but I just couldn't find an angle. It always just seemed like a stretch. So if you have ideas, I would love to hear them in the comments. But I am gonna talk about his other themes, but not these ones. So, the most obvious theme of his is vengeance. Marcus was marked by betrayal. The tragic deaths of his wife and daughter scarred him forever. However, even after glorious vengeance, even after killing the king of North Coast, one of the most powerful men in the world, Marcus remained unsatisfied. His praises were sung and his family avenged, but he had no peace. Like, it didn't help him. This is a lesson he would teach all throughout the story, but at the very end of the series, there's a great example. After the priests are exterminated, he's part of this delegation to make peace with Antaea's enemies, the mercenary army coming upon them. And he's just like, yeah, you can fight, but getting vengeance won't get you anything. It's gonna get me anything. And actually, I think Prince Aster has a really good resolution to this, where he offers himself as a sacrifice to demonstrate the futility of vengeance. An interesting theme, I think, is of like justice can be harmful, because vengeance and justice are, I think, linked in a very strong way. So I think part of that theme, it's almost like a, not like anti-Christian, I guess, or anti-religious in general, strict religion, but it's like it challenges it, I think. So for example, with like trusting your faith, like that's a pretty big critique of Christianity, I would say, is you just believe what you believe because you believe it, and it can actually lead you astray, like, crusades or something like that, or witch hunts or something. But then there's also this theme of like justice isn't actually that important. It can actually be harmful, which I don't know if I agree with that, but it's an interesting thing to think through. Especially, I think it's good to think through it with metaphors and novels. So this theme of vengeance, but also Marcus is scarred by the deaths of family in a different way. So throughout the whole story, he acts as a father figure to Cithrin. She's about the age of his daughter, and so when Cithrin becomes like, she loses her home and her family, in the burning of Vinai, and even before then, when she's just a carter, taking all the supplies to I forget where they were going. He just has pity on her, and he can't help but see his daughter in her and protect her as a result. And in this journey of assumed fatherhood, he takes on many of the roles I'd imagine lots of parents face. I'm not a parent, but I'd imagine a lot of parents would have to confront the things he confronts in this book. So he has to learn to let Cithrin take risks. That's the big one, I think. He even has to let her fail. Every plan Cithrin makes is super risky. Well, not super risky, but all of them are risky. Most of them are super risky. So from starting the bank in Porto Oliver to lending an infinite debt to the king of North Coast, she's just constantly challenging Marcus to hold her loosely. Clara also had a lot of themes of family. As Dawson leads her family into conflict, she counsels him, acting as a voice for peace and forgiveness. After the death of Dawson, she makes this sacrifice of her reputation. She limits her appearance in the court, and she even distances herself from her children just to protect them, which is super interesting. I guess thing to think through is like abandoning people to protect them. I think it happens more often in stories than in life, but it's interesting. And it's dramatic too. so both Clara and Marcus, they have to hold their family loosely in this, but it's in opposite ways, not in opposite, but in different ways. Marcus, he has to let Sithrin take risks, as discussed earlier. She has to let her fight on her own, whereas I don't think Clara does that to some extent, but not really. I think she would give anything to protect her kids, um, regardless of whether they're taking risks. This is a little bit changed in the end when um, Vincent Coe convinces her to continue having the affair with him. He's basically like, yeah, well, you should let them suffer, and she's like, oh yeah, that's true. They'll be braver. Um, which I guess I said that kind of harshly. That's a straw man, but yeah, I mean, it's an interesting idea. But I think throughout most of the story though, I think Clara is being challenged to hold her family loosely in a different way. Um, Maybe not challenged, but she does it in a different way. Um, where whereas Marcus is consistently devoting his, I guess, fatherly affection towards Sithrin. Um, Clara is like giving it to her entire family, and then also to like Sabia, her daughter, and all. That's the first place you kind of see it. And then also Vincent comes in, and she, I guess, not like blood family, but family connection with him as well, even though they aren't technically married. And uh, then her son joins the, what do you call it? The spider priesthood. That's not really what you call it. That's what I call it. The spider priesthood. But yeah, he joins the spider priesthood, and she all but disowns him because she disagrees um with the she's fighting against the spider priesthood. She just considers him lost, and I mean, I don't know if that was particularly noble of her. I don't even know if it was virtuous of her. Um, but it's certainly holding her family loosely, and that's definitely a theme in this book: is hold things loosely, hold your values loosely, hold the things you value loosely. And part of